I want to start off with touching on something that wasn't from last week's shiur, but was from the previous shiurim. When I was learning for this shiur, I came across this Tosefta, which I missed earlier, in Yoma, Perek Beit, Halacha Yud Gimel. Tosefta, which is an expansion on our Mishnah of the 5th chapter of the Mishnah of Yoma. And what it says is very interesting. I wanted to point it out. Okay, so this is from the Mishnah itself. The outer parochet was folded back south, and the inner parochet was folded back from the north. And he, the Kohen Gadol, would walk between them until he got to the north. Then he would turn his face to the south. He would walk to the left, to his left, along the parochet, until he got Aaron. So it's this line here, which is very interesting. When he got to the Aron, he pushed the parochet with his waist. And then he would put the coal pan between the two staves, and then he would gather the ketoret on top of the coals. And then the room would fill up with smoke. So this Tosefta adds a little bit more information. It says that it's one of my questions, when the Kohen Gadol goes into the Kodesh HaKodeshim, so his first entrance, he's holding the coal pan in his right hand. He's holding this other container, this other cup, right? This scoop, or however we understand it, that has the ketoret. So where did he put the ketoret? So from the Mishnah, from this Braita, the Tosefta, now we understand that so he comes in from the north side, and then he turns south. He walks along the parochet until he gets to the Aron. So presumably what it means until he gets to Aron, you'd have to understand that to mean until he got to the Badim, right? Because the Aron is not right up against parochet. There's some separation between, some distance between the Aron and the parochet. So it says, so he's holding these two things in his hand, and he has to get past the first stave, past the first bud, to put down the coal pan and do the ketoret. So his hands are both in use, so he pushes the parochet with his left side room so he can go past the stave. So it tells us that that's exactly where the ketoret was. It was in front of the Aron, between the Aron and the parochet. Okay, so now of course we have a question. This description is a description of, not of Bayit Sheni, because in Bayit Sheni there was no Aron, right? So either it's going to be in Bayit Rishon or in the Mishkan. So if it was in Bayit Rishon, so the Braita, the way it's brought, is difficult to understand, because it says uh, it was Bayit Rishon. So what did it say? That he came out the parochet from the north side, and that in other words that the Breita is going along with the way the Mishnah described the reality in Bayit Sheni, that he came in from the side, walked between two parochot, came out the north, and then walked along the parochet. But then if that's Bayit Sheni, so he never came to the Aron. And if you say that he came to the place of the Aron, that's fine, and he wouldn't have needed to push the parochet because there are no badim there. So if you say it's Bayit Rishon, so in Bayit Rishon we understand there was a parochet. And when it says that, if we understand that, then that he would go to the north, so but maybe he didn't go through two parochot, right? In other words, the way we learned until now in Bayit Shel Shlomo, we have the amatraksin, we have a wall that separates the Hechal from the Kodesh HaKodeshim, and it has doors. The doors are always open. It has a parochet. So the way we learned until now, there was a parochet. But from here, it's possible to learn that there in Bayit Shel Shlomo there were also two parochot. It's also possible. I don't want to go into this very deeply, but 1 second, I want to make sure you can see this. Yeah. So this is the Tosefta. I didn't use this at first because the Tosefta showed you first the copy of the Tosefta. This is the plain text of the Tosefta as it appears in Rav Shlomo Lieberman's Tosefta Kifshuta. But if you look at the actual Tosefta Kifshuta, it has there's a lot of stuff, right? Because he does a lot of comparison between different versions, and on that page he does like a very short perush. What he calls the Tosefta is in a separate volume, and it's full of it's much more extensive. So on the Al HaTorah website, not long ago, they got permission and they have actually put the digital version of the Tosefta Kipshuta online, which is quite nice, even though I invested already in the original books. He talks about this though, and I'm not going to go into it, but he makes a case beginning in the previous Breita in the Tosefta Yud Bet, that in Bayit Rishon there were also two parachot. That at least this was a de'ah that must have existed at the time of the Tosefta. The Tosefta entertains this idea, and the idea would be the Amat Shaksin, right? The wall itself, it's called the Amat Shaksin because it's 1 Amah wide. And the idea would be that, like it had doors in front and doors in back, it would also have a parochet in front and a parochet in back. Just a second.
So it strikes me that the combination of live coals and parochet is a bit hazardous.
Well, I think if you're careful, you can do it. Just a second. I'm not going to go into this here. Actually, the Tosefta a little bit earlier described the coal pan, that the coal pan had some extra part uh, to keep the handle from heating up. The idea being that the coal pan itself would have been made out of metal, it was entirely made out of gold. But of course, if you're keeping coals in there for a long time, eventually the handle is going to get very hot. Not right away, but it's going to transfer. So there's indication in the Tosefta that particular coal handle had a piece that it's not. I didn't go into depth. I have a feeling of Lieberman must go into greater depth, but there was something there that would block the heat from coming. Maybe it was a piece of wood. I'm not sure. I don't know. It doesn't take away from what Michael Werner is saying. Of course, you have to be careful. But remember, when he's going along the parochet, his left side is holding the ketoret, which is not hot. And that's the side that's going to be pushing against the parochet. And the right side that has the coals, that will be away from the parochet. So it's very unlikely that he would set the parochet on fire. Not that he shouldn't be careful, but anyway, so what are we left with? So we could understand this Braita is talking about a reality where even in Beit Shel Shlomo, there were two parochot, and maybe he also even went in between them, came out the front, came out the north side, and then he would. We don't know how big the opening was in the Tvir. Know how big that was, but it would not have been very. Can't imagine would have been more than 5 amot. He probably would only walk a couple of amot before he would get to his stave. Anyway, I just thought this was interesting. We can go on, but this helps to fill out the picture that we were trying to put together earlier.
Shell,
Yeah.
it might also describe the fact as it was in Beit Sheni, and the Kohen Gadol is just doing as if Keilu, as if the Aaron were there, and he's just making all the gestures he would have done in Beit Rishon, as if the Aaron was there.
Yeah, that's I hadn't thought of that. It's very possible that's why it's, even though the Mishnah, of course, tells us that there was no Aaron there, but nonetheless, what you're saying could be true. Maybe it was there. Maybe he did the action just to maintain that practice in anticipation of when an Aaron would be restored to the Beit HaMikdash. Very interesting. Yeah, absolutely, it could be. So let's go back to the sugya. Oh, wait. Now, before we do the sugya, I want to remind us of some things regarding the menorah and the shulchan. This is just some things in mind as we continue on. So in Parshat Truma, right, in Parshat Truma, we have the command to make the shulchan. Yosita shulchan atzei shitim. So now remember, amatayim arko ve'ama rachbo. It's 2 amot long and it's 1 amah wide. Yama b'chetzi komato. It's 1.5 amot high. Then it describes a little bit more. We don't have to do it for what we're doing right now. I wanted just to remind us of that particular. And then in the next chapter, toward the chapter, it tells us after we learn about the other kelim and after we learn about how to build the building of Mishkan, Shulchan. Nora will be across from the Shulchan. Otzelan HaMishkan Temana, on the south side of the Mishkan. Shulchan Titen Otzel Tzafon. Shulchan will be on the north side. Okay, so this is our placement for these things. Now, of course, the Torah here does not tell us the orientation. It doesn't tell us if the Shulchan and the Menorah were going north to south or east to west. Maybe one was going one way, one was going the other way. We don't. I just want you to bear in mind that this idea that the Shulchan, from here, the idea the Shulchan has to be in the north and the Menorah has to be in the south. So, but we're going to assume, barring any other information you might have, the north would be, let's say, in the Mishkan. The Mishkan is amot wide. So halfway between north and south is 5 amot. So presumably anywhere in the 5 amot the Shulchan could be, and anywhere in the south 5 amot menorah. We don't know exactly where they were here, but this is going to be the subject of our discussion now. Continue in the Gemara. Now, the other thing to remind us of, and I think we did this some time ago, but let's just look at this again. This is the Mishnah in Menachot. Oh, excuse. Okay, let's just read through this Mishnah quickly. Shulchan Arko Asara V'Rachbo Chamisha. Shulchan is 10, in other words, it's 10 tfachim. We learned in the Torah that it's 2 amot. This is now being described according to the Dayah of Rabbi Yehuda that the kelim were measured in amot of 5 tfachim. So if one amah is tfachim and you have 2 amot, so then of course it means it's 10. So the Shulchan was 10 tfachim long. Rachbo chamisha, it was 1 amah in width, so that would be 5 tfachim. And then lechem apanim arkan asara, rachban chamisha. The lechem apanim, each loaf of bread was 10 tfachim long and 5 tfachim wide. The way it was placed on the Shulchan, or chod rachbo, you would place on the length of the bread across the width of the shulchan. So that would mean you have a 10 tefach loaf of bread that's hanging on. It's covering the 5 tefachim of the shulchan, and then you're going to have 2.5 tefachim on either side. So fold up 2.5 tefachim on each side, so that it's all resting on, nothing's hanging over. So now we see that the length it's going to fill up the whole width of the shulchan. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Meir Omer shulchan. He says like this: a shulchan or koshnei masar, because he held that the amot of the kelim generally was 6 tfachim per amma. So it means that the shulchan is 12 tfachim and rachbo shisha, and its width is 6 tfachim. Lechem apanim, however, he says, same dimensions as Rabbi Yehuda said. Arko asara v'rachbo chamisha. It's 10 tfachim long, it's 5 wide. Noten arko keneged rachbo shel shulchan. The way that Rabbi Yehuda says you're going to put the long side across the width of the shulchan. And so now, however, you only have to bend up 2 tfachim on each side. Kofel tfachim mikan tfachim mikan. And then, so now you have a shulchan that's 12. You have 2 breads that are each 5. So you're going to have a space between them. You're going to have 2 tfachim between them. Utfachim revach be'emtza. So now there'll be 2 between them, kadesh teharuach menashevet b'neihem, so that the wind, that the air could circulate between them. Abba Shaul Omer Shama Yumim Shnei B'zichei Libona. Shaul said actually that 2 tefach area is where they put the 2 holders for the frankincense. B'zichei Libona Shel Lechem Apanim. And so Tanakama challenges him, or the other Rabbanim challenge him. They say, Amru lo v'halok var ne'amar v'natata al ha'marechet livona. The Torah says you have to put the livona on the marechet, would be the stacks of bread. So what do you mean it's in between the bread? It says you have to put it on the bread. He says, no, but I see elsewhere in the Torah that the word al, sometimes it means on, like on top of. It could also mean, like we see in this pasuk, when it's talking about the placement of the tribes in the Midbar, that Matam and Asher was next to, is the idea, right? The pasuk is V'alav Matam and Asher. It's for over. I don't remember. Ephraim. I hope. Okay, so that's a little interesting. Arbas nifin shel zahav hayu sham mefutzalim rashehen shiyu samchim behen shnei seder zeh shnayim v'seder zeh. So there were these snifim. The snifim were on either side. You had 4 of them, right? You have 2 sets of 2 that are going to be on either side of the length of the shulchan. They're essentially going straight up, and they're going to be the sides of what effectively become racks to hold each bread. So as you go up, the metal from which they're made is mefutsal. It gets bent out, and the bending out at the same distance, right, on each side, and we're going to take these half tubes to lay between them in order to put the bread on each of them. So you make these sort of de facto shelves out of the half tubes. Arbas nifin shel zahav hayu sham mefutzalim rashehen shiyu samchim behem shnayim v'seder zeh shnayim v'seder zeh. There were 2 snifim on either side, 1 for each set of breads. V'yasrim u'shmona kanim, 28 of these tubes. Chatzi kaneh chalul. Each one of them was like a half tube that was open, that was empty. Aser l'seder zeh, I'm sorry, Arba Aser l'seder zeh, Arba Aser l'seder zeh. Each side had 28 of these. Los kanim v'lo netilatam docha Shabbat. Neither the arranging of these tubes nor taking them away would push away the Shabbat. Ela nichnas me'er Shabbat v'shomtan. Rather, what would happen is the Kohanim would come in Shabbat and remove them. They would place them along the long side of the shulchan or underneath the shulchan to the length. And then on that, that's where we get to this particular part that we're interested in, Kol Kelim Sheyu B'Mikdash, and the Orko Shabbai. And now that we know that when they part this Ma'arechet of Shabbat, they take apart the Ma'arechet on Erev Shabbat, of course the breads stay in place. Now the breads are just going to be stacked one on top of the other without anything between them. For most of the week, they're sitting on these kanim. And then they come in on Erev Shabbat and they remove the kanim, place them on the floor in the length of the pointed, in other words, in the direction of the length of the shulchan. Right. So, now this here. So this is something that came up last week. We were talking about extra tables, and Paul said he thought the tables were in the ulam, right, which is the anteroom before the hechal. So, as I pointed out, that's from the Mishnah. There were two shulchanot in the ulam, bifnim, inside of the ulam, at the opening into the hechal, into the bayit. Echad shel shaish, v'echad shel zahav. One was made of marble, and one was made of gold. Al shaish notnim lechem hapanim b'knisato, v'al shel zahav b'yetziato. So the idea is that the Kohanim would come in when they had to change the bread on Shabbat. They came in, they would place the bread on the marble shulchan coming in, and then the bread that they're going to remove they're going to take it and put it on the golden table on their way out. Sorry, al shel shaish notnim lechem hapanim b'knisato, ve'al shel zahav b'yetziato. And why is that? Shemalin b'kodesh v'lo moridim, because you're up in holiness and you don't go down. Meaning that the golden table is going to be a reflection of a higher kedusha, so we make it of a more expensive material. Yechad shel zahav shalav lechem hapanim tamid, and then one of the other gold, it's inside, and that's where we're going to put the lechem hapanim tamid. In other words, we have a shulchan inside in the hechal where the lechem hapanim resides throughout the week. And here it describes how the changing of the bread took place. Kohanim nichnasim, 4 kohanim would come in. Shnayim biyadam starim, Shnayim biyadam shnei bezichim. 2 came in with 2 orders of bread. So there are 12 breads. So each are coming in holding 6 breads, presumably stacked up. The other 2 are coming in, and they're each holding one of the bzichim of the donah. The Arba Maktinehem, and then 4 go in front of them. Shnayim. So what do the 4 do? Shnayim litol shnei starim. Shnayim litol shnei bezikri. So you need 2 kohanim to remove the last week's bread, and you need 2 kohanim to remove the bezikrim and replace them with the new bread, with the new bezikrim. So now, how did they do this replacement? Hamachnisin omdim b'tzafon. So the ones who are going to bring in the new, they're standing in the north. The shulchan, according to this Mishnah, the shulchan is going from east to west because it's going right. The length of it is going along the north side of the heichal. So 2 are going to. So we have the shulchan. Let's say this is the north side and this is the south side. So I get 2 kohanim that come over here, 2 kohanim over here, and each of them is going to have to maneuver their one side to the other. Right, the people are bringing in bread. They're standing in the north and they're facing south. The ones who are removing bread, they're standing in the south. It's relative to the other kohanim because they're still in the north side of the heichal. They're not all the way in the south, but relative to the other ones, they're south. They're facing north. One side is pulling away, and people on the south, they're pulling the old bread, and the new people are bringing the new bread and they're pushing it in its place. This one's hand breadth is corresponding to this one's hand. As we understand, it was really like this, like one was being pushed out and one was being pushed in. So we've talked about this before. This word tamid doesn't always mean constant, but here it does. Here the idea is that there always had to be bread on the shulchan. And on this, Rabbi Yossi Omer Afilu Elu Notin Bichin. Rabbi Yossi says, actually, no. Like you could have the people in the south just remove their bread, and the other people could put it on. You didn't have to do this whole dance to get it to be always covered with bread. That would also fulfill the pasuk of tamid again, because we have different ideas of what tamid means. Yatsu v'natnu al shulchan shel zahav shaya be'ulam, and then they would go out. They would place the bread that was just removed on the golden table that was in the ulam. Then they would take the bezichim that had the levona and they would burn that. As far as I can tell, that was burnt on the outer mizbeach area from where they took the coals for the inside k'torot. And then hachalot nitchalkot la'erev, hachalot nitchalkot la'kohanim. Then they would disperse the bread of the kohanim. Yoma Kippurim Yot b'Shabbat. What if Yom Kippur fell out on Shabbat? So of course, they still have to do the action of bringing in the new bread and removing the old bread, even on Yom Kippur. But then they would not distribute the bread until after Yom Kippur. Shabbat. If Yom Kippur fell out on Erev Shabbat, Sir Shel Yom Kippurim Nachal Erev. Abavim ochin oto k'shulchan mibnei shidatam yafeh. Then, if if Yom Kippur fell out on Erev Shabbat, then the Seir Shel Yom Kippurim would be eaten, but of course, you can't eat it on Yom Kippur. And now, Motzei Yom or Shabbat, you also can't cook it. So it was eaten in the eve of the Bavliim, because they used to eat it raw, because their literally their minds were beautiful, but it means that they had like a mentality that they could eat that. Anyway, that's not so pertinent for our discussion here. All right, I wanted to go over this because as we do the sugya, I realized as I was preparing the sugya, we need to have more or less these details in mind. So let's go back and look a little bit at what we started with last week. So here the Gemara is discussing that line in the Mishnah, the Kelim Shebimikdash. Right, Kol HaKelim Sheyu B'Mikdash or Kan or Kol Shabbat. Mishnah, all of the Kelim B'Mikdash, their one side went parallel to the wrong side of the Beit HaMikdash itself. So on that, the Gemara brings a Braita. This is what we did last week, but I want to review a couple of reasons you'll see. Kol HaKelim Tanura Banan, in a Braita, Kol HaKelim Shebimikdash or Kan or Kol Shabbat, Chutz Me'aron. So the Braita tells us there's an exception to this. It's the Aron, because its length went to the width, it was parallel to the width of the house. That's the way it was placed. That's the way staves were placed. So here, I realized later on I misread Rashi. It's maybe a sort of a secondary issue, but I want to be careful. So we said when we learned this Braita, these last two lines are not clear to us what they're supposed to mean. It tells us that the Aron went, the length of the Aron went along the length, went along the width, so it's the width of the house. So what does the Braita add when it says Kach Haya Munach? That's the way it was placed. You just told me how it was placed, so I know that it was placed. The Kach Hayu Badav Munachim, that's the way its staves were placed. So what do these two lines mean? So I understood only when I went over this about a dozen more times that Rashi here is saying as follows: Kach Haya Munach Minalan. In other words, really the Minalan is it's as if the Braita here said this line that the Aron, that the length of the Aron went along the width of the house, and then it's as if it said, how do I know that's true? What's the source for that? And on that, it answers the Kach Haya Munach. That's the way it was. So what does that mean? That's the way it was, because that's the way the Badim were placed. Because the way the Badim were placed from east to west, as we're going to say in the Braita a little bit on, that tells us that the width of the length of the Aron went from north to south, and its width went from east to west. The Badim beputya da Aron kai, that the Badim were on the width side of the Aron. Okay, that was just this little thing I wanted to clear up.
Can this passage maybe be read to say that if this is the way it was in the Mishkan, or even as being carried to the desert?
Wait, so you got cut out of this passage. Start from there. This passage can be read as what?
Can this passage be read to say that this is how it was positioned in the Mishkan, or even as Bnei Yisrael were processing through the desert.
In other words, what you want to say, Knach, this is the way it was placed. That another way of understanding it is that we're here talking in by Sheni, but Kach Hayam Munach is a reference to an earlier time.
Yes.
I want to tell you, in terms of a plain reading of the words, yes, perhaps, but the Gemara doesn't read it that way. So it's not that you're wrong. It's just that the Gemara understands it the way the Gemara understands it now, which is Kach Hayam Munach means it was placed that way because the Badim had to be placed from east to west. So the way we understand the Breita ultimately is that the Aron, when the length of the Aron went along the width of it was parallel to the width of the house, the width of the Beit HaMikdash. The reason being the staves had to go from east to west, and we know that the staves were on the width of the Aron, so that only leaves us possibility. I have to have the length of the Aron parallel to the length of the Aron has to be parallel to the width of the house, because the staves have to go on the wide side, not the long side, but the width side of the Aron, which means they're going to be going from north to south. So what we learned last time was this idea, how the Gemara puts that all together. And the way it goes, we'll review this quickly. So, how do I understand the Braita that we just read? This is the way I read it. That's the Aron was placed in that way, the length of the Aron, the width of the house, because that's the way the bed had to be placed. So Badav Minaran. So where do I know that the Badim had to be placed like that from east to west? Because we learned in the Braita Vayarichu Badim, and then I learned from this Braita this idea. We won't go through the whole thing again. But the idea of the conclusion of the Braita is based on these in Malachim, that the tips of the Badim were poking at the parah. So that can only happen, right, if the Badim are going from east to west. And then as a proof to this idea, right, it says they're poking at and sticking out from the parochet like the two breasts of a woman, shinamar. And then they bring this. I didn't go into this. The pasuk is this pasuk in Shir Hashirim. The pasuk is Tzror Hamor Dodili Ben Shadayeli, that the bundle of frankincense is like the bundle of frankincense is my lover to me. The breasts, between her breasts, I will lie down. So the between the breasts here are being now represented by the staves, and then you could understand that the tzror hamor, that this bundle of mor, I'm sorry, not frankincense, of myrrh. Mor is myrrh. That the mor is the self, which is between the two breasts. It's this. It's and the symbolism being that the tzror hamor, which has this very pleasant smell, is representative of the Aron, which is representative of the Torah, and so forth. There's actually a lot I could say about this, but I think that just to bring a little bit of to that. Okay, So this is fine. So the first Braita tells us that the staves had to be poking at the parochet. That's fine. But then uminalan debadav the puti daron avidat. That's fine. But how do you know that the staves were on the width side of the aron? Maybe were on the length side of the aron. And then I would say that the aron is also going from east to west and not from north to south. That the length goes from east to west and north to south. So on this, we had Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yehuda Trey Gavre, it's actually Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says there isn't enough room for two people if there's only one in this space of 1.5 amot between the two staves, right? I wanted to point out that's where the Gemara elsewhere in Psachim talks about when we talk about the size of the mikvah. So size of the mikvah is 40 sa'ah, and it's supposed to be measured 1 amah by 1 amah by 3 amah. And it's supposed to be the size that would hold a typical man in one go. So the idea that a typical man, his shoulder span would be about 1 amah. So if you have two people, I'm putting this together myself, but I assume that this is true, that this idea that you wouldn't have enough space for two people in half amot is the idea that each person is going to take up 1 amah. Now, even if they're not, we talked about this last time, even if they're not both full, if their full bodies are not in between the staves, but you could imagine that even if half of their bodies are in between the staves and there's only 1.5 amot between them, then like Paul said last week, then they're going to end up bumping into each other.
Why can't they be standing outside of the staves as opposed to inside the
Apparently that's not, you mentioned this last time, apparently that's not how it was carried. It can't. Now, I want to tell you, I'm not going to speak with authority on this until I try to put this together. It's also not clear to me what this exact stance of the Kohanim was when they carried the Aron. But what it sounds like to me is that the staves went up to their shoulders. So they can't be entirely outside of the badim, right? Part of their body is going to be inside. And the other way would be is if they're holding it down like this, which doesn't seem likely. Everybody's holding it down for a couple of reasons. One is it doesn't seem mechubad to the aron that it should be held lower to the ground. They also need a certain, the aron itself takes up a certain amount of space. So you can't, the aron itself is 1.5 amot high. So if you're standing up and you want to hold it down here, there isn't enough room without the aron dragging on the ground. And if you want to hold it like this, that seems it's the most unlikely, right? Because you're going to have to be carrying this for however many miles or kilometers. This is a very uncomfortable way and not a very effective way of carrying it. So it makes more sense that it would go up on the shoulders. That's what it seems to me. And even if we go with the medrash that I mentioned last time, which is that the Aron carried the carriers, but they still have to be in a stance as if they are carrying it. But the pshat is, of course, that they carried it. So Rabbi Yehuda says, I know that the staves had to be placed on the width side because there had to be enough room to have the Kohen carry it, right, without bumping into each other. And how do I know, right? Because and then, like we said last time, maybe only 2 Kohanim carried it, and then I would want the staves closer, because then they could each put it up on their 2 shoulders and carry it. So So how do I know that 4 carried it? Tray. Because when it talks about carrying the Aron, it says the Kahatim traveled, in other words, with the Aron. That's 2 Kahatim. The Nosei HaMikdash, and they were the carriers of the Mikdash, Namitra. That indicates there's another 2. So that's the drasha. The drasha is that there were 4. Okay, so actually, the way the Gemara holds, it really comes down to this last part as being first. In other words, as I'm trying to figure out the placement of the Aron in the Kodesh HaKodeshim, I'm actually going to start with the idea that the Aron itself had its staves the width side. And that's for practical reasons, because I need space for the forepin to be able to carry it. Now I know they're on the width side. So that's really the first step. The second step is I know from the Psukim in Melachim that when the Aron was placed in the Beit HaMikdash, that the staves would poke at the parochet. So if they're poking at the parochet, that means they are going from east to west. And then I understand that now I know that the length of the Aron is going from north to south. So I'm just pointing out the last bit is really the first conceptual part. I have to start with the idea of how the Aron was made with the Badim, where the Badim were on the Aron. Then I go to the Psukim and Melachim, and then I come back. Then I can make my statement that the Mishnah states that the Aron was therefore going along the width of the building. Okay, all of that to get up to here. Tanu Rabbanan. So we learn in a Braita. Asara Shulchanot Asa Shlomo HaMelech. So we saw this when we were learning Divrei Hayamim, that Shlomo made 10 Shulchanot. Shneamar, Vayashuch Asara, Vayanach Behechal. He made 10 tables. He put them in the Hechal. Chamishanim, b'chamishanim small, 5 on the right and 5 on the left. So when we were learning at that time, we said, where is that? What does that mean, that there were 5 on the right and 5 on the right and on the left of what? Where were they exactly? But from this pasuk, I understand that he made 10 shulchanot. And if you'll say, now that's a braita. The braita is just ostensibly telling me something that I know directly from the Mikra, right? It's not adding anything at this point. It just says that Shlomo and Shulchanot. V'im tamar chamisha yamina petach chamisha mismol petach im kain batzinu sheshchan b'daron v'hatorah amra v'shulchan titen al tzelat tzafon. So, what it says, if you'll say that 5, what does it mean that 5 on the right and 5 on the left? That 5 are on the right of the door into the Heichal, and 5 are on the left of the door into the Heichal. Right? So I come in the Ulam, and then I go through the Ulam, I come into the Heichal, and there'll be 5 Shulchanot here and 5 Shulchanot here. Imken, if you want to say that's how you understand this pasuk in Divrei, that 5 are to the right of the door, 5 are to the left of the door, then you end up with a table in the south. In other words, not relatively south, it'll be literally south, because it will be in the southern half of south. Those five shulchanot now be in the southern half of the Heichal, right? Walk in, there's 5 here, there's 5 here, but 5 are to the north. You're walking in, let's say, in the middle. And in the Beit HaMikdash, you have 10 amot to the north and 10 amot to the south. You're walking in, let's say, right in the middle, 5 are to the north and 5 are to the south. So now what end up? You have shulchanot in the south. And that, why is that a problem? Torah Amra, Vashulchan Titen al Tzara. So as we reviewed at the beginning of the shir, the Torah, when it talks about the shulchan, says that the shulchan has to be in the north. So granted that Shlomo is adding 10 more shulchanot, but we don't have any reason to believe that his shulchanot should not follow in the same halacha that the Torah gives regarding the shulchan. Just like the shulchan that Moshe makes has to be in the north, we'll assume that all the shulchanot have to be in the north. So the idea is, when the pasuk vayas shulchanot asara chamisham yamin v'chamisham mismol, so I'm going to reject the idea that 5 of them were in north and 5 of them were in the south. It doesn't make sense. I can't have 5 shulchanot in the south. Ela shel Moshe be'emtza. So rather, what I'm going to say, Moshe's was in the middle, chamisha miyamino v'chamisha mismolo, and there were 5 to the right of Moshe's and 5 to the left of Moshe's. So when it says that Moshe's was in the middle, what is the middle here? What would that mean? The middle of what?
It's the middle of the counting of the Shulchanot. So if you have 11 altogether, it's in the middle of the counting of the Shulchanot. So if you have the 10 of Shulchanot and then 1 of Moshe, then that's in the middle, there's 5 on the side. It's not relative north to south to the along.
Okay, Michael, your sound is poor, but if I understand what you said, you're saying, so Moshe's is in the middle relative to the 5 on either side. That's what, right? That's what you're saying?
Yeah, yes.
Okay, so that's correct. In other words, when we say the middle, obviously it doesn't mean that Moshe's shulchan was in the middle of the Heichal, because we just got finished saying that the shulchan has to be in the north. So what we're going to do is we're going to imagine that when you walk in the Heichal, so you have now 10 amot to the north and 10 amot to the south on a length of 20, right? Because the whole chamber is 20 by 20. So I'm going to dedicate 10 on my right as I enter. That will be to the north. My left as I enter is to the south. When I say that Moshe's is in the middle, it's going to mean it's in the middle. Maybe it means it's in the middle of the 10 amot that's in the north. But what it certainly means is what Michael said. It's going to be in the middle of the shulchanot of Shlomo. Ela shel Moshe be'emtza, chamisha miyamino v'chamisha mismolo. There'll be 5 to the right of Moshe's and 5 to the left of his shulchan. That seems to take care of the problem for the moment. We'll come back to it. Tanu Rabbanan. Now I have another braita. Eser menorot asa Shlomo. So not only did Shlomo make 10 shulchanot, he also made 10 menorot. Shinemar vayaseh menorot hazahav eser kamishpat. He made the golden menorot, 10 of them according to Din, according to the law. Vayiten be'echad chamisham yamin v'chamisham mismol. So now I'm going to have essentially the same question. If you want to say 5 menorot were on the right as you entered and 5 were on the left as you entered, you came at seen a menorah. But so that would mean that I have a menorah in the north. It says that the menorah is across from the Shad pasuk, and what's maybe as is often the case when the Gemara or Medrash puts a pasuk the real proof comes from the part of the pasuk that the Gemara doesn't quote. It's only quoting in part. Because as we saw in that pasuk, it says, "V'samta tishulchan michutz parochet v'tamnera nochach hashulchan al tzela hamishkan teimana." That's the strong part of the proof. That the menorah has to be on the south side. That's it. Elishel Moshe be'emtza. Moses's menorah was in the middle, and there were 5 to the right of it and to the left of it. Okay. Let's look at it. Okay, Tanu Rabbanan. So Shama made 10 shulchanot. I quote the pasuk, and then it says V'im Tamar. And if you'll say there are 5 on the right, 5 on the left as you went, Rashi says V'im Tamar Hai Miyamin Mismol De Petach Ka'amar. That the right and the left we're talking about to the left of the entrance into the Heichal. Imkein Matzinu Chamesh Shulchanot B'darom. In our gears, it says Imkein Matzinu Shech Shulchan B'darom. It's a singular. Rashi's girsa, which makes more sense in context, is you'll find that there are 5 shulchanot in the south, right? There'll be 5 on each side. So, and Rashi explained, Shapetach haya be'emtza, because the opening was in the middle. Haya be'emtza, Shapetach haya be'emtza echal, the kota mizrachi. It was in the middle of the opening into the Heichal on the eastern wall of the Heichal as you're entering. V'nimtzu chamisha shebismol derech kenisa kulam b'daram. So then we'll find that putting them on the left as you're entering, then I'll have 5 shulchanot in the south. Ela, so what's the answer? Ela shel Moshe be'emtza chamisha mimano. But rather means that Moshe is in the middle and there were 5 on its right. 5 on its right, meaning in the south. Rashi here, again, the general rule is when you're talking about right and left in relation to the Mikdash, right is going to be south and left is going to be north. It's a little confusing because just a moment ago, when you're coming in, you count from when you're coming in, then to your right is going to be to the north and your left is going to be to the south. The Rashi is now understanding the default is we look Mikdash in terms of right and left as if the Mikdash going from west to the east is looking out, right? That the western wall, the far end of the Kodesh HaKodeshim is the back of the Beit HaMikdash. And the front of it, it's like its face is facing forward. And this would be the eastern wall. So it means that the right is going to be south and the left is going to be north. So Rashi says, Moshe be'emtza chamisha mimona b'dromo. There'll be 5 on its right, on the right of Moshe's, meaning in the south side, the southern part of the northern hemisphere of the Heichal. Not hemisphere, but hemiru. B'dromo b'chamish smalo b'tzfono, and then there'll be 5 on its left, which is in the north. But all of them are in the northern part of the Heichal. And further on, the Gemara is going to explain exactly how they were placed. So I still don't know exactly how they're placed, but I know that all 11 shulchanot are in the northern part, and they're divided into 2 rows. The 10 are divided into 2 rows. The 11th, which is Moshe's, it's not exact. Apparently, Michael said before, it's going to be in between those 2 rows. That's what we're thinking at this time. And then I have the very similar, right? And then I have the bright of the menorot. So it's a very similar thing. It's just now I'm talking about the menorot, and they're all in the southern half of the Heichal. Okay, so now we get a little bit more to brass tacks. Tani Chada. So I learn in one Braita, Mechatzi Bayit V'Lifnim Hayu Munachim. So one source, one Braita tells me when it's talking about the Chanot, that they were all from halfway in the house and inward. Mechatzi Bayit V'Lifnim Hayu Munachim. They were from halfway. So again, in the Heichal is 20 by 20. The Shulchanot are in the north side. It's 10 by 20. And now I have it that says that all of the Shulchanot are from halfway through the house and inward. Inward would mean toward the west. So it sounds like the 10 amot, if I'm measuring halfway of the Heichal, then I would measure 10 amot, and that's where I would start to place the Shulchanot. Walk in the Heichal, I would go to I would walk 10 amot, and then I would see the Shulchanot beginning from the 10 amma line. But Tani Chada, but I have another Braita that says, Mishlish Habayit V'Lifnim Hayu Munachim. I have another Braita that seems to contradict, because it says they were placed from a third of the house and then wood. So a third of the house would be a third of 20, right? Which would be 6.66666 or whatever. So you would have, right, they would be close, you'd walk in about 6.5 amot, and then you would have them. So it's a contradiction. Where were they? Where did they begin? So this is below kasha, but actually there's no contradiction. Mar kachashu beit kodshe akodeshim bahade heichal. So one Tana of the Braita, he's figuring in the length of the Kodashim in his calculation. Mar lo kachashi beit kodshe akodeshim bahade heichal. The other one is not figuring in the Kodashim. Okay, so how long is the whole bayit, the Kodesh and the Kodesh and Kodeshim? What's the length? Michael, you're muted.
I'm not saying anything. I'm just trying to.
Oh, I thought you were trying to say something. Well, does anybody remember? No? Okay. The Beit HaMikdash of Shlomo was 20 amot by 6 amot. The first 40 amot is the Heichal. The last 20 amot is the Kodesh HaKodeshim. Right? So you have the length is 60, it's 40 plus 20. Right? So if you're counting the entire length of the Beit HaMikdash itself, which includes just the Heichal and the Kodesh HaKodeshim, so that's 60. So what's a third of 60?
20.
20. But if you're only counting from the beginning of the Heichal, the end of the Heichal, so that's only 40. So half of 40, 20. Okay, so that's the good thing. So the Tana who says that we are counting from halfway through the bayit and inward, he's only counting the length of the Heichal, which is 40. The one says we're putting the shulchan from a third of the bayit inside. He's counting based on the whole length of the Beit HaMikdash. But both of them are talking talking about the spot. Both of them are going to start at 20 inside. Okay, so this is like maybe a more minor issue, but something that has to be clarified because I have two seemingly contradictory sentences. So Rashi,
where's the ulam?
The ulam is not part of that calculation. The ulam is in front of, it's attached to, it's part of the building. But when I'm talking about the Beit HaMikdash proper, it's only the Hal and the Kodesh HaKodeshim. Right? And why would I say that? Because Mishkan existed without an ulam. So understand that the ikar of what makes the mikdash is the kodesh and the kodesh HaKodeshim. So when Shlomo builds his temple, he builds it with an ulam, and that was also true in Bayit Sheni, and it's also going to be true in Bayit Shlishi. But the Beit HaMikdash proper is only the Heichal and the Kodesh HaKodeshim.
This is actually very interesting about a building. A building is not the structure, but the space enclosed by the structure.
I think that's an important point, and it actually goes. It points back to something we talked about a long time ago, when we were learning the psukim in Achim and Divrei Hayamim, when it gives us the dimensions. It gives us these dimensions, which we're going to review again in a moment, because Rashi is going to quote them. That the Beit HaMikdash was 60 by 20 and so forth. We asked a question then, is that the outer dimension or is that the inner dimension? We understood from learning that it was the inner dimension, which, as you're saying now, it's the inner dimension which is it per se. And it's enclosed by walls and by a roof. But the real Beit HaMikdash is the space that we're now delineating by these enclosures.
In a way, this goes back to the I can't remember if it was a midrash or an agadata that the Aaron carried the kohanim as it were. That in some senses, the structure is carried by the empty space that it encloses.
Okay. Yes, it's a medrash. It's in the Gemara. I didn't show you the Gemara inside, but I mentioned it in the Radak. Interesting. I have to think about. I actually have a lot of thoughts about this whole thing with the carrying and so forth. So I'm going to say yes, maybe, and with that. Tani Chada, right? So Rashi says Tani Chada mechatzi abayit v'lifnim munachim kol hashulchan. He's, of course, just filling us what the part of the sentence in the Breita that's not actually there from halfway through the house, and they were placed. It doesn't tell us what was placed, but I understand from context. I'm talking about the shulchanot, right? First, I talked about the Shulchanot, and then I talked about the Menorot. So when I get them, I'm going to talk about the Shulchanot first. So when it says V'chatzi bayit v'lifnim hayum, and Rashi says Munachim kol hashulchanot, ve'en echad mehen b'chatzi min hachitzon tzad hapetach. Not one of them was in the outer half toward the opening, meaning toward the opening of the Heichal. So it's like I said, you want Heichal. You go to your right, the first 10 amot, and then the first 20 amot is empty, and then beginning at the 20 amma mark, I'm going to start to have the shulchanot set up. We're going to go from there westward. And then I have the problem with the other Breita. The other Breita says that they were there from the first third of the bayit. So we answer that, okay, Mar Kachashiv, Rashi explains, the Mar Kachashiv Shaichal Shishim Mama Mar, in other words, who says Mishli Shabayit, Mar, of course, is just so we're clear on terminology here. Mar just means sir, master, right? And it's used in this context when the Gemara says Mar Kachashiv, it's saying the of Breita A and the Tana B, or in this case, it's the Tana Breita B and the Tana Breita A, because these Breitot are Stumo who said them. So I can't say like Rebbe says and Rebbe Elazar says. I can't say that. So I have to just attribute. I'm attributing one to Mar B and one to Mar A. That's just an explanation. Okay, the Mar Kachashu Shayechal Shishima Ma'arko. Right. So one of them is basing his calculation on the idea how that's where I get the basic dimensions. Am I still frozen?
Not anymore.
Okay, I'll go back a little bit. Thank you, Michael. Okay, so Mar is doing his calculation based on the idea of the whole length of the bayit, because the pasuk says that the Beit HaMikdash built was 60 in length, it was 20 in width, and it was 30 in height. Okay. Now, umeotan shishim hayu esrim b'dvir. Out of the 60, out of those 60 amot, 20 of them were in the dvir. That is, they were the kodesh HaKodeshim, as it says, b'lifnei hadvir, and I'll continue from the footnote. B'lifnei hadvir. Esrim ama orech ve'esrim ama rochav. Esrim ama komato. Right. So inside of the dvir, meaning past the amatraksin, inside that area, it's 20 by 20 by 20. Okay. By hechal arba'im, right? And by default, of course, then the hechal was 40. As it says in another pasuk, the arba'im ba'amah hayabayit hu ha'echal lifnai, right? So the hechal was 40 amot long. Okay. Bashulchanot yoshvim be'esrim amma shel hechal shel tzad hadvir. The shulchanot are sitting in the 20 amot of the hechal that are on the side toward the dvir, that is the western side. Man detani mishlisha bayit. So the Breita that says, the person who said in the Breita that the shulchanot begin from a third of the house. Chashiv kol hashishim amash shel dvir v'shel hechal. He is taking into consideration the entire length of the 60, which includes both the dvir and the hechal. Man detani michatzia bifnim. One that it's from halfway through the house and inside, or toward the west. Right, so he's only counting the area of the hechal. Okay, fine. So now at this point, what do we know? We know that we have what do we know about the shulchanot? There are Shulchan of Moshe. There's 10 shulchanot of Shlomo HaMelech. We know that now to put all of these shulchanot into 1/4 the size of the hechal, right? The hechal is 40 by 40. I'm sorry, I didn't say that right. It's 2 by 40. And shulchanot have to be in the northern side. So what do I have? 10 by 40. And they're going to be in 1/2. They're going to be in the westernmost half of that half. So in this quadrant, which is 10 by 20, I have to get all 11 shulchanot. That's based on what we know so far. So now I really want to know, how were they placed there? What was the setup? Tanu Rabbanan, so we learn in a Braita, Mizrachu Ma'arav Hayom Munachim, Divrei Rebbe. So Rebbe says, okay, first of all, the Shulchanot themselves, they were going from east to west. Going from east to west. So if they're going east to west, it means that their length is parallel to the north and south. When I say that, right? So that the Orech is going from east to west, parallel to north and south. Fine. That's what Rebbe says. Rebbe Yozar, Rebbe Shimon Omer, Tzafon v'Daram says, no, they were going from north to south. So that's their machloka. So the Gemara wants to examine their machloka. My time of the Rebbe. So what's the reason the Rebbe says that the Shulchanot went from east to west? Gamar mi menorah. He learns it from the menorah. Mara mizrachu ma'arav. Just like the menorah went from east to west. Haninami mizrachu ma'arav. So also, I'll learn out from the menorah that just like the menorah went east to west, Shulchanot were also going east to west. So that's Hakol Tov Yafeh, but menorah gufaminan. How do you know that the menorah went from east to west? Because regarding the western lamp of the menorah, right? The pasuk is Micharochet ha'idut, the Ohel Moed, talking about the menorah. You place it outside of the parochet, which is the parochet that's in front of the Eidut, right, in front of the Aron. In the Ohel Moed, Yarochoto Aron me'erev ad boker. Aron has to up from evening until morning with Shem Tamid, front and always. Okay, so Rebbe is going to learn out from this that the menorah had been going from east to west. That is, how do I understand this pasuk? It's talking about the menorah. So when it says Yarochot, no, the menorah has 7 lamps. So when it says Yaroch Oto Lifnei Hashem, it sounds like it sounds exclusionary, right? It says I'm going to put one of them Lifnei Hashem, but not all of them are going to be Lifnei Hashem. So now, if I'm standing in the Heichal, which direction is before Hashem? Or if I want to say Lifnei Hashem, which direction will I be pointed to if I want to say I'm looking toward Hashem, as
West.
it were?
West.
West, right? Because that's where the Aron is. And we see throughout Lifnei Hashem. In other contexts, it means in front of the Beit HaMikdash, but if you're in the Mikdash, if you're in the Heichal, so it would mean in front of the Kodesh HaKodeshim. Okay, so Isal Godatach Zafarom. So if you would that the menorah was going north to south, then all the lamps of the menorah are all equally Lifnei Hashem. So how will I understand this pasuk when it says Yaroch Oto? It must mean that only one of them could be said to be really Lifnei Hashem. Rabbi Shimon my time. So Rabbi Yazar, Rabbi Shimon says, I say that the menorah in fact did go from north to south. So what's the source for Rabbi Yazar, Rabbi Shimon's opinion that goes from north to south? Gamar Me'aron. He'll learn it from the position of the Aron. That the Aron, as we learned in the beginning of the Sugya, the Aron went from north to south. Ma Aron tzafon v'darom, af haninami tzafon v'darom. I'll learn the menorah from the Aron. So Rebbe wants to learn the menorah, wants to learn Khan from the Aron. I'm sorry, I didn't say this right with Rabbi Yozef B'Shimon. I'll come back to it in a second. Right. Rebbe says that the Shulchan Aruch went from east to west. As I learned it from the menorah, that the menorah went from east to west. Rabbi Yozef Rabbi Shimon says that the Shulchan Aruch went from north, and he says they go from north to south, and I learned it wrong. Okay. So then the Gemara says, Rebbe Nami Ligma Me'aron. Okay, so right now I'm at a standoff. Each of them has their reasons for learning why the Shulchan Aruch either went east to west or from north to south. So we start with Rebbe. We started with Rebbe, so we'll come back to Rebbe Nami Ligma Me'aron. Rebbe, he should also learn from the Aron, just like Rabbi Yozef Rabbi Shimon. Why does he learn from the Aron? So he's saying chutz michutz, ve'en danin chutz mibifnim. Says, I'm going to learn the kelim that were on the outside of the Kodesh HaKodeshim, one from the other. I'm not going to learn one of the kelim that's on the outside from the kli that was on the inside. Right? So if I want to learn, if I want to anchor myself in one of the other kelim, and I'm talking about the Shulchan Aruch, it makes sense for me to learn it from the menorah because they're both in the Heichal. It doesn't make sense for me to learn it from the Aron because the Aron is not in the Heichal. It's in the Kodesh HaKodeshim. So that seems like a good argument. Rabbi Yozef Rabbi Shimon. So now I'll turn it back to Rabbi Yozef Rabbi Shimon. So why don't you say like Rebbe, and now you learn from the menorah? Marlach, menorah, tzafon v'darom hadaman. So he says, I disagree with Rebbe regarding the position menorah. If I want to learn from the menorah, but I'll still come to my conclusion, right? Because I hold that the menorah itself went from north to south. Ela haktiv yarochoto aron avanav. But how can you say the menorah went from north to south? We just explained us why he doesn't do that. Why he doesn't say it. It says yarochoto. You have to set it up, meaning only one candle, only one lamp can be westward. So he says demitzadeh dehu atztude. He says, no, I hold that the menorah went from north to south, and that means that, yes, it's not parallel to the eastern and western walls, which also means, yes, in principle, all of the lamps are now in equal proximity to the western wall. So what is the Arochotzo? I'm going to tell you, the Mitzadeh Luhu Atzdude, that they bent in. And I lifted the illustration from printed Gemara. And what does it mean? That three, right? So it's going from north to south. So the three on the north and the three on the south are all the wicks are all bent toward the middle. And the middle one is bent toward the west. So this is the machloket between Rebbe and Rabbi Yozef, Rabbi Shimon regarding the placement of the menorah. Did it go from east to west like Rebbe, or did it go from north to south like Rabbi Yozef, Rabbi Shimon? So if you say it went like Rabbi Yozef, Rabbi Shimon, then the way the menorah would have been like this, that the candles, lamps would have been arranged thus, so that the 6 wicks are all pointing toward the center. And then the center one will be pointed toward the, so when it says Yaroch Oto Aaron, Aaron has to arrange it. The it is going to refer to the middle lamp. Whereas according to Rebbe, then I don't need this configuration. I could configure all the lamps, all the wicks being straight up if I want, because what's important to me is the one that's most west. I'll stop here now because I realized I went way over time. I apologize. Of course, now we remember when we learn Masechet Tamid, first of all, do you remember when we learned Masechet Tamid, what was the orientation in that Mishnah? To west or north to south?
It was east to west.
It was east to west. And which candle did we call the Ner Ma'aravi?
I believe the second from the west.
Second from the east.
East.
It was the second from the east. The idea being that it was the first one that wasn't closest to the east was called the west. In the context of the Gemara here so far, it seems like Rebbe holds that the Ner Ma'aravi was in fact the one that was on the far west. And here, so have to work out those two things. But to summarize, we're kind of leaving idle, but it's a complicated sugya. I encourage everybody to go over it, and I'll send you these sheets, hopefully, maybe even later tonight. I almost finished them. I was trying to add in some of the illustrations because I didn't have time to do it myself. But this is what we know. So we know that we'll put it this way. What we know is nobody disagrees with the idea that the Aron itself went from north to east. The length of it went south, so that the length is parallel to the width of the bayit. We know that from the Torah that the Shulchan has to be in the north, the menorah has to be south. The Mizbech, we didn't talk about the Mizbech Hazav, but I remember Paul brought it up last time, is in the middle. Exactly where it was in the middle is also a somewhat complicated subject, which is, among other sources, is the Tosefta that we started off with. But we're not going to go there. I'm not sure if we're going to get to that in any of these shiur. Exactly where the Mizbech was is also, but in terms of its orientation, of course, it was square, so it's oriented with 2 sides that are parallel to the south and the north, and 2 sides that are parallel to the east and the west. Right? However you turn it, it's only that way. I know Chanot are in the north. I know that the menorot are in the south. I don't know their orientation. Shulchanot. So what I do know is that the Shulchanot are in this upper quadrant. As I'm walking in, we're going to be in this upper quadrant in the north side in a space that's 10 amot wide, 20 amot long. And remember that the Shulchanot, as far as we know, that the Shulchanot of Shlomo are going to be built to the same dimensions as the Shulchan of Moshe. So the dimensions of the Shulchan of Moshe, which we saw way back in the beginning, just to remind us, it's 2 amot by 1 amot. Each one of them is 2 amot by 1 amot, half amot time. Right? So I'm going to now I need to fit 11 of these shulchanot in a space that's held by 20 amot. That's going to be our challenge. And then this machok between Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon, that of course is going to determine that each of them have an idea of the orientation. So according to each one of them, they're going to have to explain to us how they lined up in that space that's 10 by 20. But toch kedei, while we're doing this, now we understand that there are two opinions also about the orientation of the menorah. That according to one, it went from east to west, according to one, it went to north to south, and we will come back to that. So that's where we're up to. Okay. Any last questions?
Shane, first,
Yes.
the next 3 weeks I will be abroad. So I don't know. I don't think so that I will be able to. Obviously, for the third shiur, I should be in a play. So I obviously for this shiur I will not attend. I don't know what's going to be for the two other ones. And then I have a question or a remark. The whole thing is very sad because the whole discussion is a posteriori. It's no more relevant, but there should have been the same discussion when they built the second temple. And then they really had to decide what to do. And it's not easy for Jews to decide what to do. Yeah, probably. You see, here also there are different opinions. And so, okay, you have the opinions and you write them down and everybody can know what the opinions are. But if you really are building your new temple, you have to decide what to do. And they probably had to go through all these questions. And it would be interesting to know what the discussion was and what the opinions were and what they did in the end.
So this is a really interesting point. I'll just say something quickly about it because it is already late. But see, I'm gonna say back to what you're bringing up in a slightly different way. So this machloka between Rabbi, for example, Rabbi and Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, these are people who didn't even see the temple. They lived more than 100 years. They lived more than 100 years after the destruction of the temple, so they didn't see it. So, okay. What about testimony, right? Didn't some kind of edut come down about what was actually done? So here in this particular Gemara, we don't see it, although we've seen in other places, and get more before Rash, it's a Masechet Shkalim, and there's a couple of things in Masechet Eduyot, where people we saw it all from Masechet Tamid, people did bring edut about what actually was in the Beit HaMikdash. It's one thing, but I think the other aspect to this is it's not only that a particular testimony has now been lost, like we don't any longer have a particular testimony about what exactly happened, but the machloket between Rebbe and Rebbe Elazar ben Rabbi Shimon is on this conceptual level. It's not necessarily trying to reconstruct what was. It's trying to understand conceptually what should be or what could be. And even though I'm going to have to paskin like one or the other, and lahavdil, if in history I have to say one thing happened and one thing didn't happen, but in the realm of like quantum theory, all of these possibilities could happen, and that's the real task that the Rabbanim set before themselves. is to see what are the possibilities. What you say, Paul, this is absolutely true. When Beit Shlishi will be rebuilt, somebody's going to have to paskin because we're only going to build one Beit HaMikdash. We don't get to build 2 or 3 or however many.
Who is going to decide, the Sarah Datot or the Haredim or the Reformim? That's all, only for this reason you are not unable to build it.
or we'll simply have basic law, so nobody has to decide.
No, I know the Mashiach will build it, so it's going to be easy.
Yeah, it'll be easy. It'll Ze'ered min hashamayim, right? It's just going to come down, built, finished. If you ask me on a personal level, I do think that not because of these questions specifically, but I don't think that we're ra'ui to make these kinds of decisions. Naniach that there's going to be 1,000 other decisions that would have to be made, but even these things, which we're going to understand that these positions must be very important, because nobody says, could be this way, could be that way. Maybe, on alternate Wednesdays, the menorah this way, and I put the shulchan that way. Nobody thinks that. Everybody thinks that the actual positioning is actually really important. It has a real, I want to say effect, but that's not the word I'm looking for, but it has import. So at this point in our history, we can only view it in this kind of conceptual way, and we're going to work to try to figure out what are the possibilities, and not just what are the possibilities, what are the keys for the different possibilities, and hopefully from that we will be able to glean some kind of deeper insight, and also lahavdil. Just a second.
Is that the motorcade?
It's an ambulance. It's pulled up right across the street, and
it's Biden is coming to passing by.
No, Zell is a loze. It's just it's an ambulance. Looks like he's leaving. Oh, wait, maybe now, but no, it's a Kabbalut Hatzala. It's a big fire. I don't know what's going on, but maybe it's a sign that I should stop because it's going to be noisy here for a while. Anyway, right, just to say lahavdu, I mentioned to you some time ago that Sir Isaac Newton was very interested in the dimensions of the Beit HaMikdash, that he thought that he was going to be able to figure out all kinds of cosmic things. So, and that was Isaac Newton. Al achat kama v'chama Rabbeinu Zichronam Livracha, that they must have thought that this was all very, very, very important. Anyway,
I'm actually thinking about this in relation to the liturgical year and where we are now in the liturgical year in Sefer Bamidbar, which in some sense,
you don't mean liturgical year, you mean the Kriyat Torah year.
Kriyat Torah, no.
Okay. So, and what about it?
I think the big focus of Sefer Bamidbar, probably more than any of the others, is the arrangement of objects in space, or the
it's a very,
and that seems, and there's a whole. Well, no, we can go many ways with this, but it's. I mean, I think I have my own notions of why that's important, but it's think about the one what we're discussing now in relation to where we are now.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think it's important. We understand that Bamidbar deals a lot with the placement of the machanot in the Midbar. We understand that that's supposed to be a kind of ongoing reenactment of Mamad Har Sinai, which learned about in Sefer Shmot. And now the Beit HaMikdash is supposed to be a continuation of that reenactment. So presumably the placement is, because we are limited, because we don't live in multi-dimensions and multi-universes, our placement presumably is important. I'm not saying, actually, I shouldn't say that we don't. It's just that we're not aware of it. At least I'm not. I'll speak for myself.
Every now and then we have glimmers.
Every now and then what?
Every now and then we have glimmers.
We have good. Hopefully. Okay. Anyway, Paul. So safe travels. And
okay, just one more remark. At the third, the Bet Hamidrash Shlishi, according to many opinions, wouldn't be built the same way that the second temple, but like this, the temple of Yecheskel. So maybe, which is huge. I don't know how to put it on the Har Habayit.
Actually, I have a kind of a blueprint of what it would look like. And yeah, it would take up much more space. It's much larger. But a lot of the things, of course, are the same. Certain things remain the same for the Mishkan, Rishon, Bayit Sheni, Bayit Shlishi, and the description of Bayit Sheni, Chazal say they were that when they built Sheni, they took some things from Bayit Rishon and they took some things from Bayit Shlishi that were integrated. And as we saw, I think we saw to the degree that we looked at different parts of Masechet Midot, they quote Sefer Yecheskel about things, right? Which is where the description of Bayit Shlishi is. So exactly how it's going to be, we don't know. But even exactly how Bayit Sheni was, we don't know. Although there's of course a lot of archaeological evidence, which is quite interesting. But Nichya v'nireh. Okay. Baruch Tziyeh. Thank you, everybody. I'll see this of you next week.
Thank you. Good night.